Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. Welcome to our Requirements Management and HP ALM webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into your chat window on the lower left-hand corner of your screen. So now I'd like to go ahead and just get us started. I want to introduce you to Chris Emerson, Principal Architect for Avnet Services. Chris, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, great, thanks. Hi everybody, my name is Chris Emerson, and I've been using HP Application Lifecycle Management for a number of years now, and today what I'm going to do is give you an overview of some of the features of HP ALM Application Lifecycle Management, Requirements Management in particular, and we're going to talk about requirements in general. So I'm going to give you first an overview of ALM. Here you can see this in our topics. Prior to that, Jen's going to jump in and give us a little overview of Avnet Academy, but then I'll talk about ALM. We're going to talk about requirements management in general and why requirements are important, and especially why it's important to have some sort of management structure, some sort of approach to them, which is a very important thing to make sure we all understand, especially today because there are so many different types of development methodologies flying around and combinations of those hybrid techniques for approaching small projects and large projects. Then what I want to do is talk about three key areas I'm going to also demonstrate. So the topic of test coverage, which would be linking the requirements that you've generated to actual test cases. So validating your test cases by making sure they're satisfying a requirement and vice versa. The two of those really need to go together. So we're going to look at that at test coverage. Traceability is the next thing we're going to take a look at. So I will show you how you can use HP ALM to actually see a requirement being linked to a test case, the execution of that test case, an opening of a defect as a result of the test case execution on a particular step, and then how that traces back and forth between the requirement and the defect and everything in between. Then finally, we'll talk and demonstrate and see risk-based quality management and how that's handled in HP ALM. And that's quite an important topic for several customers that I work with, and it's a very powerful tool to let you know when and how to manage certain types of requirements that you may have, especially those that are business critical. So let's go ahead and we'll get to the Avnet Academy overview. And Jen, you can go ahead and talk to us about Avnet Academy.
Great, thank you, Chris. So yeah, Avnet Academy offers many benefits. So we have a variety of instructors with real-world experience. Most of our instructors have experience deploying software and hardware solutions in complex environments. So they actually are there on premise with the customers, working in these HP products in this case. So they're really experts in their field. We also have a variety of in-house staff through our services organization. So again, those are the services members that are working with customers on premise and making sure that their networks are implemented. And then we also have a large partner network, where we utilize partners and they help with our training, and they also are doing implementations and working in the field as well. Also at Avnet Academy, we can customize a training roadmap to fit your needs. If you choose private on-site training for your group, we can customize the curriculum and classes based on your needs and the current skills of your staff. We also have a global presence. So Avnet Academy has a presence in countries all over the world. What that means to you is that you can enjoy benefits like using Avnet training credits in different countries, or have one education contact who can coordinate training for your employees around the world. You can choose to learn from the comfort of your own home or office. We offer a variety of courses, public classes where you can participate in the classroom or virtually. We have private classes that are offered, so they can be offered at your site or at training facilities that we work with our partners at. We also offer self-paced e-learning, which allows you to take the course at your own pace It does include hands-on labs, and you get office hours with our expert instructors. We are offering, we do have some HP courses currently scheduled. You can visit academy.avnet.com and book your HP course today. And Chris, I'll let you go ahead and start with the ALM overview.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that overview of Avnet Academy. It's an excellent program, and I would encourage everyone to take a look at the URL that was on that slide. So let's get on with the ALM overview itself. So we're going to look at this slide in the context of an overall approach to application lifecycle management, not necessarily tool specific, just more or less what is application lifecycle management and why is it important, and what is really key to having a good ALM methodology, a good approach. What are the key factors? So the most important things to take into consideration are listed here. There's always a planning aspect, a delivery aspect, and then actually running of the support, maintenance, and ongoing life cycle of the application, not just starting from the beginning where you're developing a new product and then releasing it and letting it go, but you have to make sure that that product can be maintained, that you're handling customer support tickets, and providing good responses to customers and their issues, also in terms of providing good updates and patches and things like that, which really get into new releases of the product, iterative releases, which get you back into the planning and delivery stages. So I first just want to kind of go around this circle, and we'll talk about the things that are here. I'm going to start with the planning stage aspect of it. So before you can even begin planning the project that you may have at hand, it's really critical to know what's the customer need, what's happening with the customer, what are the views the customer would have of their portfolio, what they would like to accomplish, and what then decision would you make about how you're going to do that? How should it be delivered? It's going to be a web-based application. Are you going to have to tie in with a lot of middleware components, things like that? So what are the policies around that type of decision making? What type of architecture do you want to use? Things like that are really critical. So that's kind of covered right here. Then we get down into the real nitty-gritty of the project itself. So you've got to plan and track the activity around the project. So if there's no good planning and tracking, how are you going to know whether or not you're done with any of the customer requirements? How are you going to know if you're done with the project itself? We've probably all heard stories about projects that have failed. There are certainly many IT projects out there that have failed. There are many that have succeeded too. And it comes down to a lot of management and misunderstanding of the requirements themselves at the very beginning of the project, exactly what is being asked for, what the customers want. And that's where requirements capture and management is really important. So requirements can start out as broad, open ideas, but there really needs to be a framework around how those requirements are captured. And when I say requirements, for those of you in the audience that practice Agile or are looking at moving away from more traditional development methods such as waterfall and are getting into Scrum and Agile, then you get into capturing user stories to support the features and the themes. And then finally, the epics. What does the customer want? If they could do X, they could accomplish Y, and that adds value to their business. So once all that's kind of figured out, you've got to then begin managing your development effort. So managing the developers, the architects, how they're going to work together, how they're going to know what they need to work on. And when they're working on releasing iterative builds, so we hear a lot today about continuous integration, which means that the building of the code, what's available, what's been worked on in its smallest form up to the completion of the project where you have a finished product. How do you validate that you're successfully matching the development efforts to the actual requirements that the customer has defined? How do you do that? So that's something that has to be figured out. After a certain number of releases have happened, usually earlier in the project these days than ever before. Hopefully, if you're following an agile methodology, you're doing it right away. You begin working with testers to handle your functional validation, and that's doing functional testing where testers are opening defects, developers are looking at those defects in their backlog, and then repairing them. Testers also these days are doing a lot of testing, and it's highly recommended to do testing that kind of goes off the path of what you might see in a scripted test approach. So you always want to have some of those scripted tests to make sure that there aren't any regressions occurring within the code base after each build. But you also want to allow your testers to kind of go and explore and do exploratory testing to really look in the nooks and crannies to make sure that they're not missing anything. So that's on the functional side. There's also things like automated build verification tests that could be run, unit tests, things like that. In addition to the functional testing, you really need to make sure that there is a certain quality of service being delivered within the application. So that refers to these two items here: performance validation and security validation. You want to make sure that performance goals are being met. You might have a great application, but it takes 20 seconds for the login page to appear. Well, that's probably not acceptable. And you also want to make sure that things like your security roles are configured correctly to block access to certain areas of the application, things like that. So after this is kind of cycling through its process in your application lifecycle, be it Agile, Scrum, Waterfall, whatever the case may be, you need to move on to actually delivering the final product and giving something to your customers they can use, and then looking at support, capturing support tickets, and responding to them. Along the way, you've got these two other things I have listed here. So DevOps is something we hear a lot about. That part of the integration kind of falls back into the planning and delivery in addition to running. DevOps is really just a name that describes the coming together of development and testing in a little more tightly coupled manner. One of the things that HP is really strong on here is APM, Application Performance Management. And there's a great suite of tools for managing production environments to proactively alert you as to whether or not there's going to be an issue. And that's something you really need to consider too in the overall life cycle. So we've covered the planning, the delivery, and the running. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide and just look at how HP ALM can help you address the different roles that are in the organization. Okay, so we've got a number of different key stakeholder roles and positions listed here, and I also have some products next to each one of them, so you can kind of map what HP ALM can integrate with, as well as how it integrates and why it integrates. So you've got your security. HP Fortify covers that in real time. You've got security that covers your code and code that developers are putting into the builds, as well as security of the application itself from the front end. And there are a suite of other tools that can handle the front end security needs on the various layers of the application and the network itself. The performance engineers are going to be interested in the ALM lifecycle. So if you can't automate your performance tests, you're going to have a performance engineer running the tests. And that can often be a very complex task and take some very specialized knowledge of the architecture you're using. Now, what's really nice with ALM is now it's integrating with not only the most popular tools that are out there, like .NET and Eclipse for developer environments, but there are over 70+ developer tool integrations besides that. And you can see here we've got SAP and Oracle listed, just to name a couple of other ones. So I mentioned Eclipse and .NET, which would be Visual Studio, can handle that as well. And this kind of integration into ALM is a key part of the life cycle because it makes sure that the developers are doing what you want them to do, so that their work is meaningful and that it's tied to your various backlog items, your work items, which would be the requirements, so things like user stories, your defects, any finer grained tasks that might be coming out of the development effort. All of that can be tracked within HP ALM and reported on, so that you can see that whether or not the pace of the overall project lifecycle is on par with what you're expecting. And you can react to changes, so you can see if you're having problems that are serious before they get into a later stage of development, and especially before they get into production. So quality assurance, that's your testing and manual testing, and that ties in actually up here with automated functional testing. Requirements management, so we've got the role of the business analyst or the subject matter expert who might not know anything about the architecture of the project itself, but they're able to provide information in detail about requirements and the interdependency of the requirements. This is also analogous to having a product owner. So a product owner, in the case of an Agile approach, is going to be the person who is always grooming the list of backlog items to make sure things that are prioritized correctly, as well as some other aspects of requirements we'll talk about in just a minute. So also up here is the HP Sprinter product being listed with the manual tester role. So that's in close relation to the QA role. Okay, so Sprinter is something that it can be used by manual testers to really transform the way they do their work and help them to create meaningful defects for developers, our developers down here, to be able to work on, and eliminate problems like not being able to reproduce a bug, something like that. HP Sprinter captures a load of information about a defect automatically for the manual tester, and it captures the exact steps they took to get to that point in the application. It's a really powerful, powerful tool, and it goes back also to what I mentioned a minute ago, which is exploratory testing. So, I've mentioned development methodologies, and Agile Manager from HP is specifically designed to integrate with HP ALM to give you a really strong Agile management functionality that, since ALM is so flexible, it can handle this as well as some of the older approaches, such as waterfall. So who would use HP Agile Manager the most? Probably the Scrum Master. I think that you could get into the product owner and the subject matter experts, the SMEs, also using Agile Manager quite a bit, because it's going to tell you things like, give you things like your burn down charts, your storyboards, your task boards, but you can also see the defects that are in the system along with the other backlog items within a sprint. So that's what Agile Manager can do for you. And then finally, we've got the person sponsoring the whole project, probably, up here at the top, and they can use the ALM dashboard capabilities of ALM to really see what's going on at any point in time in a near real-time view of velocity of the project. So that's how everything is fitting into ALM here. ALM is really the hub for all of these different areas. Okay, so let's go on to just talking about some of the key features. There are some things that get a little more detailed here. So what you can do with ALM is, look across multiple projects. So you can have the capability to look at not only something that you might be assigned to, or if you are, let's say, VP of Apps, you want to look across projects and know what the whole portfolio is doing. So that's a key capability of ALM. You can do things like share assets across multiple projects, version and reuse those assets so projects can actually subscribe to each other. Manage and define requirements, which is what we're going to do a little bit today. And down below, you see this report down here? It's kind of got stoplight colors associated with it. I know you can't read the font, but this is a sample of what's called a scorecard report that's built into ALM, and it lets you know whether or not your testing is complete and really whether or not you can go or not. You can make that go, no-go decision about the application. And there's two things here. There's mobile access and access from anywhere. It's kind of a they kind of mean the same thing in many ways. But you can have add-ins to your mobile device that you can load, and you can connect to your ALM server, and you could even run tests and log defects. And that's all using apps that are available through the HP Anywhere mobile platform. We're going to look at traceability. We have been talking about the methodology choices you could make for the application development and for the overall life cycle. And finally, you'll be able to plan and manage your overall quality. So you'll really be able to know, am I getting what I expect from the estimations and the planning that I made for my developers to develop the code or configuration packages, whatever the case may be, and are the quality metrics I expect being met, and is my overall project going to be able to be released on time? Is my customer going to be satisfied? And when we get into different methodologies like Agile, I'm going to be showing my customer what the application can do after each sprint. So typically every 2 weeks there'll be a percentage of time spent working with the customer to make sure that the product is really being built and will be delivered as expected. Okay, so that's ALM specific information. I want to talk now about the overall importance in detail and with more discussion about requirements management. Okay, so most projects fail because the requirements are not meeting with what customers expect at some level. It's usually the root cause of project failure. And you could see in the statistic that I found in my research to date, it's running at about 68% of all projects fail in some way or might slip because of some type of requirements problem, some sort of issue. So requirements are very important to gather up front, and it's very important to manage them carefully. Without having something to lend itself as a guide to development and to testing, it's very easy to go off track and build something that's not going to meet your customer's expectations. And it's also very easy to do things that might introduce functionality that is not supported or not properly tested, which leads to the need to fix defects that are in production instead of fixing them before they get to production, where it's much less expensive to repair them. And one of the things that an Agile methodology has done for us over the years is that's been adopted and is being promoted just more and more, and everybody is really going Agile these days. It's addressing 4 key areas within the typical type of requirement process that have always caused problems. So I just want to talk about those. The first thing I have listed here is really specific to the tendency with some organizations to want to go out and create some product or address some need in the marketplace. It could be an internal need or external, simply because they have that capability and it's within the same market sector. So one of the examples that I've read about is one of our large search engine companies that's out there where Meg Whitman came from. I won't say its name, but they had a tendency to go out and just start projects simply because there was something new happening in the online world. There was some new craze, some new direction. So they went out and tried to start projects on it and began to spread their teams so thinly that they couldn't concentrate on their core capabilities and their core needs, and that became a problem for them. Some people have called that the peanut butter effect. They wanted to spread peanut butter on everything they could find. Not sure how that came about, but that's one of the names I've heard. The other problem is that without a good product owner, that it's very easy to misunderstand what customers really want. So it's very easy to hear what a customer is saying, what they're asking for, and even take what they give you in terms of documentation about a requirement, but then fail to deliver on all the aspects of that requirement, or to completely miss something that's very important about the requirement. So it's important to have a product owner who works closely with the customer to make sure, as iterations of the application are being released in the pre-release version, kind of in the test environment, that it's doing what it's supposed to, and that the needs are being met. So one common problem is that just gets missed. The final product is delivered, everything is signed off, and then whoops, you understand that you learn that you completely missed the mark in some way. These next two things, I think, have come up quite a bit for most of us in the projects we've worked on. I've seen this a lot. Featureitis, or feature overload, is very common. So you may run into instances where there are just ideas that keep spinning off of each other about things that could be put into the application that wind up causing a lot of bloat. There's also a tendency to want to always add new features with a new release. We all use Microsoft Office, right? I hate to pick on Microsoft, but they used to have this tendency to want to keep adding feature after feature with every release of Office. And it became, kind of got a reputation as a bloated application. Well, now they've gotten a little smarter about it. They're doing a much better job with containing that and going back to just promoting what they need to and sticking to the core capabilities and really making the product easier to use. Part of the reason for that is that Microsoft practices Agile very intensely in their development effort, and they use the things that they are writing themselves to develop their own products. So that's one thing they've done to help, and one example of how you can beat feature overload. The other thing that happens is that you might get features that become stale listed in your requirements. So they can also be requirements that become stale, right? So you could run into a situation where several very meaningful requirements were defined 6 months ago, and the marketplace has shifted, or the line of business has changed somehow. Something has changed. And if the product's feature requests and requirement requests and things like that have not been figured out and been analyzed recently, there may be several features that developers are working on that have no meaning anymore. So that's one thing that can create a lot of wasted work. So keep in mind, those are 4 things that Agile addresses, but you can address these if you're aware of them and you stay cognizant of the fact that they can happen in any methodology. But it's very important to make sure that you're always paying attention to your list of requirements or your backlog items, whatever the case may be, to make sure that these 4 things are not happening. Okay, so let's go on and we'll get into our demonstration now. But before we do that, I'll just explain a bit about what I'm going to show. So we'll link some requirements. I'll link a test to a requirement. Then we'll actually run that test or simulate running it, and I'll create a new defect, and then I'll show you how it's linked back to the requirement, and talk about the importance of that. Okay, and then we'll look at something called risk-based quality management. So what does that mean? That's the practice of assigning a risk factor to each requirement, and then rolling up all of those requirements and all of those risk factors to let you know what groups of requirements are at high risk. How long will it take to test them? How can I plan my resourcing? How many hours is it going to take to accomplish full coverage of that particular test? Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. Okay, so what you see before you here is HP Application Lifecycle Management version 12.01, and I have a project that has several requirements loaded. We're in the requirements module of HP ALM. There are several other modules here. We're not going to touch on all of them, just requirements, test planning, the test lab, and defects. Okay, so I've already set this up so that you can see my list of requirements on the left, and you can see it's in a tree structure. So I've got requirements, individual requirements like this one, grouped together under different topics. Okay, which is one way that you can visually see the relationship between requirements. There are other ways to organize the requirements, specifically creating traceability between them. So I can very easily say that one requirement is really dependent on a group of requirements that could be in a completely different, could really be in a completely different module altogether. So for example, my credit card sign-in page requirements may be completely dependent on my credit check validation system, something like that. But those two systems really are going to reside in completely different groups in my requirements tree. So HP ALM can handle that. So in the middle here is a tabular view of all of the requirement, or all of the tests that cover the requirement. So a requirement by itself is really meaningless if there's nothing to validate whether or not that requirement's been met in the application. Over on the right-hand side, I've popped open the test plan tree so that I can select some tests to drop into my coverage view. And I happen to have one highlighted right here called Book Flight. So I'll just click the arrow. We can bring that over. And I could see the status of that is that it has not been run. I'm also given a pie chart down below so that when these tests are, if I put more tests in here, we could drop in multiple tests certainly at the tabular view. So I can really have several tests covering one requirement. And there's one that's passed. So you can see our pie chart updated. And I can see I'm not completely green on this chart. So there's work to be done for this requirement. And this information is all contained in reports that can easily be accessed in our dashboard. So this is the way that you can link a test to a requirement in ALM. I could also go directly to a test itself. So let's go ahead and click on the link here and go down automatically down to our test plan to Book Flight. And we'll go over to the Requirements Coverage tab. And there I can see all of the tests, all of the requirements that are covered by this test. And there's the one we were just looking at. If I wanted to just jog back over to requirements, I can hit the ALM back button up here. Okay, so it's very easy to navigate between the two. What would happen if I had a whole folder full of tests? You might be wondering, well, I can click on a folder and I can click the green button. I'm not going to do it because what that will trigger is the addition of all of these tests in that folder to that single requirement. Okay, so now that we've got a test covering a requirement, I'm going to execute this test and open a defect. So let's go into the test lab. And down here in the test lab, there's our test. It's sitting in what's called a test set. So a test set is just a set of tests. So this would be this test set, if I remove this filter, contains several tests. And some have been run, some have not. So there's a lot here. I'll just put my filter back in. Okay, and I don't have any run here. This is a manual test. I'm going to simulate a manual run. Okay, I'll click Run with Manual Runner. Oh, yes, there is. There we go. All right, the manual runner is now going to present me with some opportunities here to enter configuration values for the test, anything that I want to record that's specific to this test, maybe if I'm trying this on Windows 8 or something like that. Whatever the case may be, there might be custom fields here, anything that I might have wanted to specifically record about my manual test execution. So let's suppose we've got everything filled in. I'm going to begin the run. And this test has a few parameters associated with it, so I'm going to just accept the default values. I'm not going to try and change anything. And it's a very simple test. So we've only got a few steps. Well, we've actually got 11 steps shoved into one. Not the best practice for writing a test case, but that's okay. What we want to illustrate is what happens when we have a defect. So first I'm just going to fail this test, or this individual step, and then I'm going to open a defect, brand new defect. And we will call this something, we'll give it a summary title of, first name field not visible. And we don't have any required fields here. We should have severity being required. I'll go ahead and fill that in. If I failed to fill anything in here, HP ALM would let me know. Down below here in the description, there's some information automatically captured. So I've got the step description. I've got the expected values. Should work fine, sure. And the fact that there were some parameter values needed. I didn't add any parameters. I took the default values, so it's just leaving these all blank. I'm going to save this now. Okay, and I'm going to stop my test run. Okay, so it's marked as failed. And now if I can go about this a few different ways. What I want to do is I want to show you how you can go from the requirement to the defect, or the defect from the requirement. So let's go into our defect table. So I've got a lot of defects here. I happen to know that no one else is using the system right now, so I'm going to scroll to the bottom of the list. And this defect number 87 is the last one entered into the system. It's going to be my defect. Okay, and it's got the severity that I entered. There's the name I entered. So let's look at the linked entities. So why doesn't it just say linked tests? Well, you may need to link one defect to another defect, or link a defect to several other defects because of the complexity of a particular issue. And if I'm a developer and I work on a defect, that can also be tracked within ALM. The work of several developers can be tracked within ALM, so we could see who's worked on the defect, and then they could mark it as fixed, and a tester could retest it. So just some of the things you could do with defects in ALM. So I've got one record here. I can see the linked entity is actually a step. Okay, so there is an individual step which I was running when I opened the defect. And that step and its detailed information, I'll go ahead and click on it, is recorded within a run. So every time a test is run, I'll move this out of the way, every time a test is run, that test run data is stored separately. And the reason it is stored separately is that the test case may change over time. So if a test case has some adjustments to some of its steps, you want to make sure that when the test was ran in the past, that you've captured the steps as they were when the test was originally executed, and not as it is today with the changes put in, because then it won't really make sense. Let's say that step that I had created a defect for no longer existed. Well, I need to have a record of that step as it was when I was executing the test. So, so I've got a copy of that. So I could see here in the run details, I've got link defects. We have to actually update this to say all links, and there is our link step. Okay, I'm going to, just so we can navigate here, I'm going to cancel this. There's the defect right there. I'm going to right click, and let's go to the test instance. So this is going to take us into the test lab. So ALM's navigating for me. I didn't know where this was. It took me there automatically. And now from here, I can right click on this row. I can go to the test in the test plan. So now I've gone from the defect. I've gone from what the defect was linked to originally, which was a step in a test run. This is the test that was executed. And here it is, and these are all of the requirements that that test was covering. And if I click on one of those, it will take me to it. So in that way, I've got a record of how my requirement is linked to potentially to a defect, because you might have tests that run and pass, but more importantly, how my defects are linked back to requirements. And you can run all sorts of reports on this information. The HP ALM course will show you how to do that. It'll show you how to do all the things that I just did here and explain them in much more detail. And you'll be able to create a nice suite of requirements and tests and be able to report on just where you are at any given point with the project. So let's go ahead and talk about risk-based quality management. And I'm going to do that with a different folder down here. I'm going to use this folder called Application Usability. And we've got a few individual requirements. We have another group down here of other requirements and another group. So there's quite a bit showing up in here. I'll just go ahead and click on keyboard support. So let's move over to risk assessment. Okay. Within this risk assessment tab, what we've got here is a status completed. I could exclude this requirement and its assessment summary from overall analysis. I'm going to leave that unchecked. We'll include everything. And I could see my overall scores here. If I wanted to change any of these, I could very easily go in and change this. I could lock this down as well with permissions if I didn't want anyone to go in and make changes. Okay, so let's take a look at the questions that were answered to get to this point. So I'll click on Assessment Questions. And let's try to resize. Well, can't resize that. So here are the questions. And we'll move that over. So this is, as you can see, a table. And we've got 4 questions here. These are just the built-in questions that come with ALM. So I can remove these. I could change them. I could change the answers that are associated and the weighting of the weight, as in, is this, let's say, rare would probably be something like a 1 or a 2. And very often could be 5 or 6. So you've got a scale that you can work with. And this is all configured behind the scenes in the project customization. And I'm not going to get into that. That's a more detailed topic that the classroom course actually gets into. So each of the questions are grouped by business criticality, failure probability, and functional complexity. So all of that data rolls up to these results. And what happens when you answer these questions for each of the individual requirements is that they roll up to an overall assessment. So referred to also as analysis of the risk. So I'll click here on our top folder, and we get a new view. So it's a nice colorful view here. And it tells us that within this grouping we have 17 requirements total. We have 15 that are being assessed. None are missing assessment. There are 2 that are not accessible, or not assessable, sorry. And that would really be these 2 other groupings that are down here. So you can't assess a group of requirements. You have to assess the requirements individually. And based on the assessment, we've got a few metrics to look at. So total required testing time, 157 hours. Now, if I wanted to just do some simple what-if analysis, I can change the value in here. What if I've only got 1 week to do testing? Well, I'm only going to be able to do 50% of the testing necessary to really make sure these requirements are being covered. That's not good. So I want to adjust this. Let's say I can only get, the next step up is going to be 2 weeks, or 160 hours. Well, then I've got a little excess capacity. So it's important to have this sort of information, because then you know how you can dedicate resources to different areas of the application. And you could take some measure of comfort in knowing I've got a lot of high-risk requirements here. I've got a large amount of testing time. This whole area is going to be important. I'm afraid we might need even more time let's go ahead and give this 3 weeks. Okay, then we're going to have plenty of time, and if anybody wants to add anything in here or change some of their answers, we're going to have some excess capacity. So that's the sort of thing you can do here with risk-based quality management. You can also report on this. You can do additional analysis that you apply to the child groupings. All topics are covered in the HP ALM class as part of the requirements module. So that's everything that I wanted to show you. I'd like to now open up the floor for a few questions. I think we could do a time check here. I think we have, about 10 or 15 minutes. So let's go ahead and open it up. Jen, are you still there? Would you like to take some questions?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. I do have a few questions that came in while you were presenting. So question number 1, we use Agile in our development. How do we map epics, themes, and user stories in the HP ALM system? Okay,
great. That's a great question. Well, really what those are just different types of requirements. And HP ALM has very strong support for typing requirements, and even allows you to do, just with simple point-and-click configuration, the presence of custom fields or system fields. Over here, I'll click on the Details tab now. These things are showing up here. You can add and remove fields down here based on the type of requirement that you've got defined. So I think I might have user story in here. No, I don't. But these requirement types can be added to, they could be edited, and that's how you can set up your epics and themes and your user stories within Agile. You can also incorporate HP Agile Manager, so that within Agile Manager, the out-of-the-box view of the world is in Agile. So you've got your epics and themes already there for you. That's the way of creating the backlog items within Agile Manager. And all of the things that you would create in Agile Manager would be pushed down into HP ALM in the same structure. So I hope that answered your question. So that's a good one. Thanks.
Great. Okay, and the next one, what is the best way to manage a backlog of tasks along with our requirements?
So that's another good question. Within, and that's kind of getting into Agile as well. So within each backlog item, there are usually a set of tasks, or there always are some tasks associated with a backlog item, something that has to be done, be it some work or maybe a user acceptance test, something like that. Well, those items can also be managed with ALM. You could do them with ALM by itself by creating additional sub-requirements, or you can create tests from existing requirements, and those can become tasks. Or you can look at Agile Manager, and you can create your tasks within Agile Manager. And by the way, with HP Agile Manager, you can have that as a solution that runs on-premise or in the cloud along with ALM.
Great. And then if we import requirements to start our project, can we still edit those requirements and re-import them?
Yes, you can. I would highly recommend that you use Microsoft Excel if you're going to do that, but you can absolutely do that. You just have to be careful that you don't make any radical changes to your requirement names. As a matter of fact, it's best not to make any changes to the requirement name because that is going to be how ALM knows that you're re-importing the same thing more than once.
Okay, awesome. And then our last question is, how can our developers see defects and requirements in their own development environment, like in Visual Studio or Eclipse?
Okay, that's a great question. Within Visual Studio and also in Eclipse, there are add-ins that come with ALM that a developer can install. And if there are any developers out there or anybody who's worked with any sort of development environment these days, they are built to hook into add-ins. They are built to be extended, especially Eclipse. So, which would be, for example, a new perspective in Eclipse. You can load an add-in that will connect to HP ALM and allow that person who's using that environment to see particular requirements and defects within a single project or more than one project. They can also filter their view of requirements and defects based on filters that are defined here in favorites. So if we had any defined over here, we could just type in the name of maybe our private favorite that might be a list of requirements or defects just assigned to me, and that's because that's all I want to see. I don't want to see everybody else's work. I just want to know what I have to do. I can see that in my IDE, and when I say see it, what I mean is there is a list that would appear, but upon clicking on any individual item in that list, I could see the same detail that I see right here. So detail and description. So that way your developers typically would come in, and the way that customers use this capability is that they have their developers install the add-ins, sit down to do some coding, and before they start, they look at the requirements or the defects and make those active tasks within their development environment, check out the code that needs to be changed or the files that need to be altered in some way. Then when they check those back in, the developer simply comments that they were fixing a defect or fixing a requirement, and ALM tracks that information. So it's a very powerful way to do that. Okay?
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Great. Thanks.
So I just want to thank everybody for attending our webinar today. And Chris, I want to thank you for presenting. That was very insightful. And I will make sure that everybody who attended receives the recording playback so you can watch this on demand. If you have any questions, here's Chris's contact information. And don't forget to visit academy.avnet.com to book your next HP course. Thank you.